Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. Happy Thursday. Maybe you listen to it on Friday, then happy Friday. Who am I to tell you what day it is? Thank you for stopping by. As always, we're going to preview the DFS slate, mainly DraftKings, only DraftKings, 4 games ahead of us. We got a featured main slate this time, so not quite as confusing as last week. And as always, we're going to round out the episode with some more player prop goodness from the one, the only, PFF Zone, Andrew Erickson, the prop prophet himself. Andrew, good week last week. Good week all season, man. How are you?
Yeah, it was a good week. Jalen Reagor coming through with the unders. We had a listener chime in on Twitter and say that he hit on a big parlay because we talked about the Jalen Reagor under. And I mean, it's just right now, it's tough out there for Jalen Reagor. Not only did the Eagles draft him over Justin Jefferson, who looks like arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL. You know, Reagor has less receiving yards than Henry Ruggs this season. Henry Ruggs went to jail in week 8. So it's a mess for Jalen Reagor. And I know, Ian, you weighed in on Twitter as well, you know, talking about how you want your cat to be a dog. I mean, and then were you just watching Cat Dog? I know you talked about the theme song slapping, just like on your mind. Like, where did that come from?
I don't know why I had the cat dog mindset going on yesterday. I don't know, Andrew. Sometimes, I finish writing, the mind's just a little bit out there. I end up just watching YouTube videos of cat dog theme songs and unfortunately putting Mr. Reagor under the bus. I will say, like, every time Reagor makes a bad play, like, people now need to all tweet about Jefferson going ahead of him. It's getting into, like, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown being on the same college team, like, Matthew Stafford, Clayton Kershaw being little league teammates, Jimmy Graham playing basketball. It's starting to reach that territory, Andrew. So look, I'm not saying we can't ever mention it again, but tweeters out there, let's start being a little more creative. Let's see if we can do plays on the joke that we all know is coming each and every time. But we're unfortunately, maybe fortunately, not going to be talking about Jalen Reagor anymore this season. We got the divisional round ahead of us. 4 games. Make sure you check out Dwayne McFarland and myself previewing all these in greater detail. Today, Andrew and I are going to focus more so on the DFS side of things. Andrew will have plenty of prop bets when we finish up. So, Andrew, we can kind of go back to our traditional format this week. Again, main slate, all 4 games. We don't have to deal with this, 3-4 different viable slates like we did last week. So with that in mind, let's get started on our cash lineup, just trying to win heads-to-heads, 50-50s, highest floor possible. Don't really care about ownership, not trying to take down a big multi-entry field or anything like that. With that in mind, Andrew, I think Josh Allen does make all the sense in the world to go get at quarterback. With all due respect to Mahomes, he really is the only one giving us true dual threat upside, as we've talked about. First repeat fantasy overall QB1 since Dante Culpepper got it done in the early 2000s. And to see him only be 300 more than Patrick Mahomes, I just think it's worth getting up there for. I mean, there's enough questions with Jimmy G, with Tannehill, Stafford, Burrow, even, Brady without the weapons, that for me, it kind of comes down to Rodgers, Mahomes, or Josh. When there's only a $500 dollar difference between the 3, I'll just take the one with, I think, objectively the highest floor projection, and that is Josh Allen. A little bit difficult to stack him with Diggs, I think, because we're going to want to get probably Kupp or Adams instead, and there's not a ton of pump plays this week, but we'll get to that more in a couple minutes. Are you with me, Andrew, that it probably makes sense in cash games to go ahead, get up to Josh Allen this week?
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think that he has the highest ceiling of any quarterback and the safest floor of any quarterback because of the rushing that you alluded to. So again, and you don't even need necessarily stack him if you don't figure it out, that because a lot of the things he's getting done is on the run. I just can't envision a scenario where he's game script proof. If they get up on the Chiefs, it's not like he is going to stop scoring fantasy points. They're not going to rest him or do anything like that. They're going to continue to keep the pedal to the metal, knowing that the Chiefs are on the other side. It's a good matchup for him. You look at the rushing production that he's had over the last 7 weeks. He's at 65 rushing yards per game. Again, his rushing prop, hint, hint, spoiler, 48.5. Yeah, I'm taking the over on that. 65 rushing yards per game, 9 carries per game in his last 7 games. So this isn't like something new that he's like, playoffs, Josh Allen's going to start running, which we usually see from a lot of quarterbacks. Like Josh Allen has been running like the last 2 months. Like he's been running around. So I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon.
Most forced missed tackles this year, Josh Allen, by a quarterback of the last 5 years, other than 2019 Lamar Jackson. He was electric on the ground all year long, continues to do so in the playoffs. Running back is where things get a little more interesting. And I mean, wide receiver. Look, we have 8 good teams left. They're all good offenses. There are viable options all over the damn place. Right now, I'm leaning towards Elijah Mitchell, Cam Akers, maybe Jerick McKinnon if we need to get down there. And that's just more so based on wanting to pay up at wide receiver and just not having really many punt options, I think, out at the wide receiver position here. So as much as, it might be nice to get up to a Joe Mixon or play, the Derrick Henry roulette, I just think I'm going to be paying down a little bit more. Andrew, I know you're interested in Devin Singletary and Leonard Fournette. Won't disagree with you there. But again, I think the kind of moral of the story here is we're probably going to be taking 2, if not 3 of these running backs priced below $6K. Again, it's just going to be hard to really try to go up and get the receivers we want while also trying to get Mixon, Jones, or Henry. And I think the floor and ceiling value we're getting with those wide receivers is superior.
Yeah, I think you want to definitely not go over like the 6K mark with the running backs you play in cash. I mean, Mixon has a really bad matchup. Henry, we literally don't know like what he's going to do. Right. Like he's the perfect and this is like Derrick Henry, when we know that he's going to be playing. It's like if he's really high rostered, you usually don't play him in tournaments. But then when he's really low, you just play him no matter what. Like it doesn't matter who he's playing.
Easy game.
That's how you do it. So I know that the early rostership projections have him with some decent ownership so far. So I'll probably end up being a little bit underweight on Derrick Henry, but that can change on one report that says that he's full go or he's going to be on a snap share. Like we don't know at this time, what the updates are we don't even know if he's going to play. Like that's still also in the range of outcomes.
But Andrew, he smiled. He smiled in the press conference.
I mean, I hope he plays. I want to see him out there for the playoffs for sure. But for Devin Singletary, I think I would not want to stack him with Josh Allen in a tournament setting, but in a cash game where I'm not necessarily looking for the high tier ceiling outcome with each of my guys, I think that he's okay to actually play with Josh Allen because that's why you're banking the points that Buffalo scores no matter what. Like you have basically all of the rushing touchdown equity between those two players. Singletary is involved in the passing game. He had the highest route participation of any running back during the wild card round. I mean, he's basically, turning into 2021's version of Leonard Fournette from last year. Just totally taking over the role in the running back. Like they're not using anyone else. And he's been good this year. He's been, during the last 7 weeks, he's been really efficient, getting a lot of the touches, getting the majority of volume in the Bills' backfield. So I'm just trying to bank the volume with Singletary and same thing with Fournette. His role, first in expected fantasy points per game since week 10 due to his massive role as a receiver. We have Bernard and Keyshawn Vaughn kind of also working in that backfield. But I don't know. I think we saw Bernard have a much bigger role last year because there was no Ronald Jones, and they just needed to put someone else there. I think that they're going to turn to Fournette. I'm pretty sure Bruce Arians said last week if Fournette had suited up, he would have taken on his usual workload. So I'm still pretty confident that he's going to still be. I mean, Bruce Arians does a lot of stuff, so maybe I shouldn't really take that.
He's been good to us this year. He's been pretty good to us this year.
With Elijah Mitchell, I know you mentioned him. So you don't have any. I guess my only concern with him in cash is okay. Packers are up 14-0. Is Elijah Mitchell catching passes, or is it Juszczyk? Or because the other thing too is I almost feel like Debo is the running back I want to play from the 49ers because he's actually the game skip proof guy. If they're winning, he's going to get 10 carries, and if they're losing, he'll get 10 targets. So I guess that's kind of how I look at the 49ers situation.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Mitchell this season, he's played 12 games. He's had at least 17 carries, not even including the, reception or 2 he gets per game. And all but 2 of those, to be fair, one of them was a Trey Lance start. We can throw that out. On the other one, they fell behind, 14 points, and he only finished with 13 touches. So it's fair, but I think you could argue Singletary, I think, deserves to probably be above both of them. I would like to see that Arians quote. I'd like to see if Fournette is going to be full throughout the week. I know we probably won't see it because he's still on the IR and they don't have to, I guess, give us the actual practice designation. My concern with Fournette is, look what happened to his kind of role the first time they played the Rams. Giovanni Bernard actually had 10 targets, 8 catches. This was before Fournette kind of took over as the full featured 3-down back. But again, with him coming back from injury now, I am a little bit concerned about that as well. So I just think that Mitchell, I feel a little more confident in his touches, but maybe this is a reason to go down, Andrew. Maybe we take Singletary and we go down to a Cam Akers, who was starting to take over towards the end of last week, and even splitting the snaps basically last week. He finished, with I believe a 52% snap rate. The guy was still flirting with that 18 touch mark. Yeah, he had 18 touches, 53% snaps. Excuse me. So we can get Akers there for a little bit cheaper, seemingly ascending, not descending. Tough matchup, as we know. Or we just go all the way down to Jerick McKinnon at 4,800. These are, I think, the main cash viable players. If you guys, disagree and you want to kind of go really far up, okay, but I think, again, you're going to be better off spending that at wide receiver. What do we think about McKinnon? Because, Andrew, there aren't many places to save money on this slate. If we want to go up higher, we're going to have to do it somewhere. Jarek, okay, we're probably not going to be getting the same sort of touch ceiling as these other guys, but you could argue his target ceiling is actually similar, if not higher, than almost anyone else on the slate. Yes, Clyde Edwards-Helaire probably going to be back, but Darrell Williams not practicing with that toe. And even if Darrell is out there, man, it seems like McKinnon's done enough to continue to get 5-6 targets. And, that goes a long way in a full PPR site like DraftKings.
Yeah, and it's also the last game on the slate. So you could put in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, something happens, it flares up. Okay, then you can move down to Jerick McKinnon, who now has this massive role and is massively underowned because, this late, news about Edwards-Helaire not being fully. I mean, he had a setback last week too, so it's no guarantee that he's been practicing in full, but, he practiced last week and then he did not practice and then he just missed the game entirely. So who knows how healthy he really is? We thought Darrell Williams was healthy. I know he stole your line saying great day to be great. And I think that literally fooled everybody into playing him in DFS because I'm like, oh man, he went with Ian's line. This is absolutely perfect. The dude literally scores negative fantasy points. I turn over to my girlfriend. I'm like, hey, you scored more points than Darrell Williams today. Good for you. Great day to be great for everybody else. Maybe that's what he meant by it's everyone else is going to score more fantasy points than I will today.
Not a great day to be great for Darrell, but I still appreciate the mindset. Remember that, people. It always is a great day to be great. Now on to wide receiver. Ooh, boy. Cooper Kupp versus Davante Adams, Andrew. Both these guys absolutely dominated in their previous matchup against their respective defense. We did see Cooper Kupp, dud for him last week. 61 yards and a touchdown, 5 catches. That's how ridiculous of a season Kupp's had, that can even be considered a dud. You would like to think against Tampa Bay, they're not going to get away with being able to have that run heavy of a game plan. Maybe the Packers are able to get up on the 49ers. What do you think between Kupp and Adams? Who do you want to center around in cash?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought a lot about this because it's really tough. I think it's a really critical thing because you just hope that they both score the same amount. They both put up 25, 30, and it's oh, it didn't matter who you played. We were all good because we both know they're obviously both the elite options, but chances are you really can only gem in one. And just looking at the recent production from these guys, even though Kupp had a down week last week, if you look at the targets over the last 3 games, so he's actually hasn't seen more than 7 targets in any of the last 3 weeks, which is kind of weird because I think we were all just assuming his player pops at, receiving yards at 100 yards. All right, easy. Take the over on Cooper Kupp. He's literally hit that number every single week. So I still think that that's factored into his price that, he's just been this automatic every single week play. But, the usage has actually been trending down a little bit over the last couple of weeks. You look at the quarterback, who do you trust more, Matthew Stafford or Aaron Rodgers? That's easy. You obviously trust Aaron Rodgers way more than you trust Matthew Stafford. You look at the weapons that are surrounding Davante Adams versus the weapons that are surrounding Cooper Kupp. OBJ is looking dazzling out there, just catching touchdowns left and right. You have Tyler Higbee, who leads all tight ends in the playoffs in target share at 20%. OBJ's target share is at 20%. They have Van Jefferson, who's still involved. So I really think that, I went in kind of thinking, it's going to be Kupp. That's the guy I want. But as I kind of dove deeper in, I was I think I actually might want Adams here. And I think that the rostership projections actually reflect Adams is a little bit higher than Cooper Kupp. Not sure if it's just because of the price point, because Adams is a little bit cheaper. But I just think looking at Adams against this defense, he's playing the 49ers cover 3. He saw 18 targets against them the last time he played in week 3, 30% target share against cover 3 this season. And I just know what Aaron Rodgers does in the playoffs, and it's throw the ball to Davante Adams. That's just what he does. Whereas Matthew Stafford, he played really well last week by not jamming targets into Cooper Kupp. Maybe he's starting to feel more confident about these other receivers. And it's no, you don't need to always jam into Cooper Kupp. They just want to win the game. Whereas Rodgers, I think that if they are going to play well, it's going to go to Davante. So I don't know if I've convinced you, Ian. I kind of had to try to convince myself because, again, it is a very tough decision. I'm not sure if you lean either way, if you have a strong take on either.
I'm leaning Adams as well. Look, I know it's been, making its rounds in social media about, Troy Aikman's quote about, if back in his day, Michael Irvin would have had 10 catches in the first half if, he was getting that sort of coverage. The The thing is, though, and I think Seth Galina did a great article on this on PFF.com, the way the 49ers are playing the Cowboys and the way the Cowboys and Dak's progressions kind of go, it was all just inside out. And they were, really it was going to kind of go against Dak's progressions to be going kind of the outside formation like that. And CeeDee Lamb, he was their normal slot receiver when each of Gallup and Cooper were healthy. But over the last 2 weeks, combined only 7 total snaps in the slot. Davante Adams, man, they use him all over the place. You go back to that week 3 game against this defense, 19 snaps in the slot, 37 out wide. He surpassed 20 snaps inside on plenty of occasions. It's Davante freaking Adams. They do everything they can to get him the ball better than any wide receiver, I think, in the game. And it's just inevitable, man. I don't think there was a better example of him being unstoppable than in week 3 when freaking Jimmy G throws the go-ahead touchdown with like a minute left. Everybody in the stadium knows the ball is going to Davante. What happens? He catches 2 passes and puts them in position to win the game. So I too lean Adams. Just, it's only $100 difference. You can pick either one if you're going to get up there. We're certainly not going to call you an idiot if you want to go a Kupp instead of Adams. We are picking between a freaking, Maserati and a Lamborghini, whatever the hell example you want to make here. I do think it's Adams. And just by the way, because last week, we had to talk about weather in every single one of these. Looks like all 4 games are going to be okay. It's going to be especially cold in Green Bay, but the wind and precipitation, the stuff that we usually worry more about, is all expected to be fine. So leaning Davante Adams. After that, Andrew, right now in my cash build, I have Gabriel Davis at 4.6K. We are seeing him, even with Emmanuel Sanders back, continue to be featured, just not as a bench guy at a minimum. And it's just going to be really tough to stack Allen with Stephon Diggs. And then Tee Higgins at 5,700 just seems way too cheap. And to Burrow's credit, only 2 other times this year has Higgins actually finished with fewer than 5 targets. The rebounds from those performances, 6 catches, 114 yards, and a touchdown on 8 targets. And then the absolute explosion, 12 catches, 194 yards, and a pair of touchdowns on 13 targets. So not saying Jamar Chase is going to be ignored just so they can get Higgins involved. I get it, last game of the year, but 5,700 for someone that we know has the exact same upside pretty much as Jamar Chase, or at least in the same ballpark. I think that's just too cheap to get around to. But honestly, Andrew, you can literally go down from the top. Kupp, Adams, Debo, Jamar, Evans, Tyreek, Diggs, AJB, Higgins, Beckham, Ayuk. Now we're under 5K. We can sit here and talk through a scenario where all those guys have a good game. Like this wide receiver crew that's left in the playoffs, absolutely loaded. And I am trying to squeeze in AJB, I think, in that flex spot if possible. So that's going to evolve around, really punting at tight end, which we'll get to in a minute. What are you thinking here, I guess, with the complementary receivers aside from Davante?
Yeah, I think that it's important. You look at some of the rostership projections and, look at the guys that are projected to be more heavily rostered. Because you made the claim that you can make an argument for a lot of these guys because, again, there are no bad teams playing this week. Right. They're all good teams and good players. So I think that just kind of honing in on rostership projections really does help you make these critical decisions. In cash, you play the guy that's more popular. That way, if they go off, you're not getting buried. But if if the random 5% guy goes off, it doesn't matter because nobody played him in cash. But in tournaments, you obviously want to have the reverse mindset because it's you don't need to play bad players here. But guys will just be under roster just due to the fact that there are only so many plays that you can make. I think one receiver that deserves mentioning here as a pay down option, Byron Pringle. I know we talked about liking Josh Allen, so he's much cheaper than any other Chiefs player. I know that the Chiefs are coming in pretty cheap. Tyreek Hill at 6.6K. I was I had to do a double take. Has he ever been that cheap? Ever? I was just damn. But then when you look at Hill's numbers, he has been just so bad. He has had that one 35-point game a couple weeks ago, but he's 45th in expected fantasy points per game over the last 6 weeks. He's just been doing nothing. I know he's been dealing with some injuries here and there, but Byron Pringle leads the Chiefs in routes run, target share, and air yard share over the last 4 weeks. It's really weird to say that in a Chiefs offense, but Pringle clearly has the trust of Mahomes and the Chiefs coaching staff. He's not in some type of gadgety role like Mecole Hardman, who would just randomly see spikes in routes running. Mecole Hardman is so random with his production, and he really needs Tyreek Hill to not play at all for us to really get his ceiling. And that's not even a guarantee because we've seen plenty of times where Hill doesn't play or is limited, and Mecole Hardman actually does nothing. Just the most in case Hardman happened to be really involved in that game. So Pringle caught 2 touchdowns last week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's the clear-cut number 2 regardless of wherever this offense goes. So I think Byron Pringle makes a ton of sense, especially with, I mean, the Bills, like they're going to really focus on Tyreek Hill, like trying to not let him beat them. I don't think Pringle's going to necessarily be someone that they try to really hone in on. And I think that he's going to be involved. So I think Pringle 4,200 is probably the lowest I'll go at receiver that I can feel like pretty good about. I mean, McKenzie, like, yes, he's playing a little bit over Cole Beasley. Could that change? Yes. And how high is his ceiling with Beasley still playing and Emmanuel Sanders still playing? Like, if these guys were out entirely, it'd be okay, like wheels up. But because they are playing, like, it's still like McKenzie, he's still playing less than 50% of the snaps, even though he is playing more. It's probably still not enough. So he's probably a guy for tournaments. Same thing with like Tyler Johnson, Juwan Jennings. Like, yes, they're like number 3 receivers, but it's like they've been like that all year, and they just haven't, like, they don't have any ceilings, as I'm kind of a little bit afraid of. So that's kind of my spiel on. I like Pringle.
To your previous point, I mean, looking at our ownership projections, which you can find on pff.com/DFS/ownership, the highest owned wide receiver projected is AJ Brown. Then we got Tyreek, Davante, Kupp, Higgins, as we brought up, Diggs, Evans, Debo, Chase, all these high priced guys. The premier low priced, high owned wide receiver, Byron Pringle. I do think 4,200 does help you a lot in your lineup. What if, though, Andrew? Because, looking at the injuries, there's not a ton to keep an eye on for the Chiefs. We're going to want to monitor Darrell Williams, Clyde Edwards-Helaire in that backfield. Over in Cincy and Tennessee, we're pretty much clear. Over in LA, make sure Andrew Whitworth is going to be okay. There's some small things going on in Tampa Bay as well with Brashad Perryman and Cyril Grayson. But I think maybe the biggest potential edge we could get here comes down to Green Bay. Marquez Valdes-Scantling was limited on Tuesday with a back issue, downgraded to a DNP on Wednesday, and we have Randall Cobb coming back this week off of IR at just 3,100, Andrew. If we lose MVS, Cobb is the cheapest punt we can go. Who knows what his, exact role is going to be. If MVS is out there, I'd be terrified he's going to be like nothing more than the clear-cut number 4 guy. But if you go back the last time, even all 4 of these guys were healthy, it was that Seattle game, and it was Adams, clear-cut number 1. Then each of Lazard, MVS, and Cobb were playing between, I think it was 58 and like 67% of the snaps. So I guess the question is like, and this will take us right into tight end. If we know that there's going to be one spot in this cash lineup that we don't feel good about. It's either going to be paying down at tight end to like CJ Uzomah, or it's going to be going dumpster diving all the way down to Randall Cobb. Which one do you think you are more willing to do? Pay down to a Cobb, to a Byron Pringle, or pay down on tight end? Because, man, I love the tight ends out here. The problem is everyone we just talked about that we want to prioritize, it's going to be awfully hard to really get up to them. And, we basically have to go, Higbee or Dawson Knox. Like, that's the highest we can go if we don't want to go all the way down to Uzomah. And again, keep all these other guys we just talked about.
Well, I mean, if we have like a bunch of injuries with the Packers, I mean, I would even think that I'd probably play Uzomah. He'd probably be the guy I would look toward. I mean, 3,400. I mean, he's still super involved. They don't have any other tight ends that they use in the Bengals offense. I know the matchup is brutal. The Titans have been really, really good against tight ends this year, even against, the elite tight ends when they face guys like George Kittle, when they face guys like Travis Kelce, they've kind of kept them in check. But you're not playing Uzomah because you think that he has the ceiling like he did last week. That was a really good matchup against the Raiders, one of the worst teams against tight ends. So I don't think we're going to get a repeat performance, but you're just hoping he catches a touchdown. And with that same mindset, I honestly don't even think that if you have MVS ruled out, okay, that's another receiver you're moving from the equation. What is Randall Cobb's role going to be? Don't know how much he's going to play. So I think Lazard makes a lot of sense at 4,400. He's still like really cheap. So but he's not as cheap as some of these other guys. So, I mean, Josiah DeGuara is at 3K, and he's been the routes run savant in Green Bay since Robert Tonyan went down in week 8. So DeGuara is an interesting guy if you really want to punt. I mean, he's 3K, and I'm not playing Ferkser over DeGuara. Like, come on, like I'm not going down this. We'll get into Ferkser later in the under-overs with the props, but yeah, I mean, DeGuara would probably be the guy I'd look at.
Ferkser. Every time I hear the name, I just think of all those poor best ball teams that will never ever see the light of day. Okay, defense. Are we just taking the cheapest, the 49ers?
I mean, no. I mean, like, Rodgers doesn't throw picks. Like, that's the issue with Aaron Rodgers. Like, he doesn't, like, he's the one quarterback that doesn't take sacks and doesn't throw, like, interceptions. So, like, I really think the 49ers could get 0 points. And I get, like, it's a punt. I think that we can find way. I mean, I think that I'd honestly rather just play like the Bills and hope that they're playing in a shootout environment. They're a real life good defense, and Mahomes, top 10 in interceptions this year.
49ers are real life good though.
That's fair, but let's see Nick Bosa. They have the other injury to the other linebacker. And I think it's really it's about Rodgers. Like Tannehill. So also looking at the Bengals defense at 2,700, like Tannehill and Patrick Mahomes. So Tannehill was second in the NFL in sacks this year. So that he will take sacks, and he was top 10 interceptions and turnover worthy plays. So that there is a turnover based type of sack floor with Ryan Tannehill at quarterback. Same thing with Mahomes, not as much, which is obviously why the price is a little bit cheaper, but I think the Bills defense is better than the Titans defense. So I'm trying to get up to Bengals at 2,700 or the Bills at 26. Don't want to play 49ers.
Do you see how lazily they priced this? They just literally went $100 increase for every single defense.
It's because they're all good defenses. That's the thing. It's like, that's why it's like you really look at the projections, because it's like you can find a good guy that's like, AJ Brown versus Jamar Chase. Like AJ Brown is like triple the rostership that Chase is, but it's like, I mean, there's not like a 3 times, outcome where we see AJ Brown, 3 times is more often going to outscore Jamar Chase. Like it's probably more like 50-50, but that's not how it's reflected in how people are kind of viewing the players.
We just got some word that Trey Hendrickson is expected to suit up. Obviously huge for the Bengals pass rush. If you have the $200 to spare, go ahead and get up to Cincy. If it's going to completely break your lineup and, all your hopes and dreams, I do think the 49ers are okay at 2,500. Keep an eye on Fred Warner, but he did practice in full. Nick Bosa went from a DMP to a limited. And the one stat I haven't thrown around, Aaron Rodgers, your third most sensitive quarterback this year to pressure. To Andrew's point, even when he does get pressured, he's not the type that's going to be fumbling and throwing interceptions and giving you those types of plays. But it is a good defense, just like every other one left in the NFL right now. Gotta love that. Okay, that's going to basically sum up the cash game. Just to quickly kind of recap, Andrew and I both leaning towards Josh Allen as our quarterback. At running back, this is the week that we're probably going to pay down a little bit when possible. Just want to be able to get up at wide receiver. So Devin Singletary seems like the front runner. After that, Elijah Mitchell versus Leonard Fournette's an interesting discussion. Cam Akers is viable. Might be best just to go all the way down to Jerick McKinnon, though, at 4,800. Wide receiver, Andrew and I are team Davante Adams over Cooper Kupp. Hopefully those are not famous last words. Tee Higgins at 5,700, just way too cheap. Also love AJB at 6,200, and as does everyone else. Just one of these guys where ownership is high enough, players good enough, value's good enough. Just want to go ahead and lock him in. And then with your kind of final flex spot, it does probably make sense to pay down to one of Byron Pringle. And if you're really feeling crazy and MVS is out, I think Randall Cobb with 3,100 does give you some nice flexibility. We just talked about defense and ideally getting an extra couple $100 to get the Bengals going against the Titans. And then tight end CJ Uzomah is your pay down option. No, I'm not going with Josiah Deguara. Andrew, I know you love your 3K or lower tight ends, but I just think that, Uzomah at just 3,400 is going to be worth it if you aren't able to pay up and go get some of the, higher end ballers on the pricing scale. On to GPPs. Now we're trying to win $1 million. We were trying to quit those day jobs. And to do that, we got to try to beat out hundreds of thousands of other people trying to do the exact same thing. So time to get a little contrarian, get a little different to go get that big money. I love Matthew Stafford with we'll go Cooper Kupp here, and then one of OBJ and Van, man. We know Kupp, maybe he will, if he does get a little bit reduced ownership because it's going to be tough to do the Adams and Kupp, maybe that's another strategy, man. Actually put Kupp and Adams in the same lineup and freaking pray that the 3K wide receivers you got to put in the rest of it can actually do something. But I just think this really sets up well for Stafford, and he kind of is coming in. Not that, quarterback ownership is something we need to really worry about, but seeing him at 6,200, man, like over 1,000 less than Mahomes and Allen and those other guys. We know Stafford at his best can be as productive as them. We saw that in the first matchup against the Buccaneers when he went for over 304 tutties. Stafford this year against the blitz, which the Buccaneers do, that's the second highest rate in the league. 14 touchdowns, just 1 pick, third highest PFF passing grade. So I think this Rams offense matches up really well against Tampa. I know their cornerbacks are getting healthy, but you start to look a little bit at these offenses. I think Tampa and Buffalo, man, if you just want to look at the quarterbacks they face this year, I think you'll be a little bit more underwhelmed by some of those past defense metrics. So Stafford with those guys, I think makes some sense. What about our boy, your boy, I don't know why I said our boy, but Tom Brady, Andrew, because yeah, Goblin may be there. We saw the low ADOT last week. You know, it didn't seem like the usual explosive passing game, but it's still Tom Brady. We know the ball's going to Evans. We know the ball's going to Gronk. And man, if they get behind like what I'm talking about, all of a sudden, it's going to be hard for Brady not to drop back 40, 50 times. Maybe this is the week where we can actually get somewhat contrarian by playing the greatest freaking player of all time.
Yeah, I think I've played Brady in tournaments more than any other quarterback this year, and it's been a pretty profitable strategy because we don't need to get super weird with who he's throwing the ball to. Like, that's part of the reason why it's important to look at not only the quarterback you're playing, but look at who you're going to stack him with in these tournaments. So again, you're looking at the price. Oh, this quarterback is more expensive. This quarterback, well, then what are their, like, how much does it cost to play Brady with Gronk and Evans? Like, that's what you want to look at, the cumulative salary of these players and even the cumulative rostership to kind of see like how contrarian is the Brady, Evans, Gronk stack versus the Stafford, Kupp, OBJ stack, like looking at things like that. So really kind of putting more emphasis on who you're playing alongside. I mean, Brady, he threw for 400 yards the last time he played the Rams in a game that they lost. I mean, Brady hasn't played, I feel like, a competitive game in like the last month. Besides, like, there hasn't been another team that's really been able to go toe to toe with them. I mean, against the Eagles last week, like, he really didn't have to do that much. Like, we were just like praying that he would just get more yards. I know you were talking about your parlay. It's like you just needed, if the Eagles had just like could do like something on offense, like all the overs for the Bucs would have all hit. Like, they would have all hit because the Buccaneers would have to continue to keep throwing the ball, but they didn't have to because the Eagles literally couldn't do anything on offense. So Rams, 4th in most completions allowed to opposing quarterbacks, which I think is really key because especially in DraftKings PPR scoring, you're getting points every time Brady completes a pass if you have one of those receivers on your team. So I just think that the way that the Rams design their defense, it really works really well for, I think, Tom Brady as a DFS stack, especially on DraftKings.
Also worth noting, Joey Burrow, Jamar Chase, maybe just going with Tyler Boyd, who has scored in 4 straight games instead of Tee Higgins. Not the worst strategy in the world. Looking at some running backs now. Look, man, I mean, we've kind of said this throughout the year. What's an easy strategy at running back and wide receiver for tournaments? Do the opposite of what's easy, because that's the roster construction that is going to lead to the highest ownership. So we talked about all the sub 6K running backs that are easy to fit in your lineup, and then we can go and get to Cooper Kupp and Davante Adams of the world. So go get Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones, Derrick Henry, these guys that are going to be priced up and a little more difficult to get into the lineups. I do kind of agree with Henry, though, Andrew. I think there's enough concern about the workload and seeing his ownership as high projected as it is already. I'll probably be underweight on Henry, but I do think Aaron Jones and Joe Mixon can be helping out there. And then just, consider going to the second guy in the most chalky backfield. So, looking at Jerick McKinnon, hey, maybe it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire who gets the short yardage. Not a short joke, just, a real fact that might be happening there. He gets the goal line touches and, falls into the end zone a couple times. Maybe Cam Akers takeover isn't happening. Maybe it's still split between him and Sony Michel, and Sony Michel is going to be sub 5% owned. Giovanni Bernard, look what happened the last time the Buccaneers faced the Rams. Gio had 10 targets and actually was the pass down back. Maybe Lenny is now at 100%. Can also look at Dontrell Hilliard instead of Derrick Henry for some of those very same reasons. So again, these are tournaments. I fully understand why the 4 other running backs that are higher projected owned should be higher projected owned, but we're betting on some crazy shit to happen. Just realize, these guys, CH, Sony, Gio, Dontrell Hilliard, they should be, I think, projected at a minimum, 8 to 10 combined carries and targets, maybe like a little bit less for Gio. And, in the NFL, stranger things can happen when you are a good player and you're getting that sort of workload. So I would say, really, again, try to get one of Jones or Mixon if you're able to find, the salary savers, and then don't be afraid to go really cheap against, basically just fade that whole like 5K range is, I think, the moral of the story here. Andrew, I know you have some similar thoughts, but maybe we don't need to fade the entire 5K range if we start seeing some of the ownership get splattered around. I know right now it's looking like Fournette and Singletary could be, the apple of everyone's eye. Maybe, just maybe then we can actually go with a Cam Akers and Elijah Mitchell and not have to face, 30, 40% ownership with it.
Yeah, I think that there's the fact that Michelle is still like involved enough. I mean, you talked about the snap share. I mean, it was pretty much 50-50. You have Akers at 52% and Michelle right around, that 40% range. So it's not like Akers like totally supplanted Sony Michel. And I think that it would be very, very shocking if we saw Michelle like not play or just like basically just become irrelevant. Now, right. I think that the lean and how they've used Akers the last 2 weeks, especially as a receiver, not even just like a receiver out of the backfield, like legit, like running routes down the field. I mean, the guy had like 50 air yards last week, which is just absurd for a running back that you never see that. Usually air yards are like negative for most running backs, but Akers was actually being used downfield. And how do you beat this Bucs defense? Not running it up between the middle, between the tackles. They stop that every single time of the week. They allow the second most receptions to running backs during the regular season. So that's why I like Akers more than Michel. Again, Michel could be the guy that scores the rushing touchdown. It's totally still in play. But if this game script goes the way I want it, I want the Buccaneers to be ahead, and I want the Rams having to push the pace. Because if the reverse happens, like we've seen this before, the Rams don't mind trying to slow the game down and using their running backs. We saw it against Arizona. Like they were fine. Just like, let's just run the ball the rest of the game. Like they didn't need to push it with their team. And honestly, it makes sense. Like, why would we want to put Matthew Stafford in a position where he can throw more interceptions? Like we just don't want that to happen. Like, let's run the ball. And they did that against Tampa Bay when they faced them early in the season. Sony Michel had over 20 carries in that game. And it was like, whoa, like Sony Michel, like 20 carries against the Bucs. Like, what's going on here? And it's because they were winning that game. So I do think that the way that this game hits its top tier ceiling is that type of game script where the Buccaneers are playing with a lead. They're always going to be throwing no matter what. And then the Rams have to catch up. And in that scenario, I think we're going to see more of Cam Akers. And that's really where you get a lot of these ceiling games from running backs, is when they get involved more in the receiving game. So it also works off potentially chalkier Cooper Kupp. If Cam Akers is using, so I think that makes a lot of sense too, when you're looking at, if you're not going to play Kupp, you don't want to just totally fade the Rams offense, because they are in a good spot in a very high projected total game. Cam Akers can potentially be the guy you look for the Rams.
Looking at some wide receiver goodness now, I mentioned before, pretty, can be an easy game in tournaments. Just don't exactly play the highest projected guys, and you're going to have an easy chance to leverage yourself from the rest of the field. But maybe you do actually find a way to differentiate that lineup by really, really paying up and getting more than one of those top guys. Just realize the rest of your lineup, you're really going to have to hit on those. Otherwise, things are going to get ugly fast. But we did get an update on this Packers receiving core. MVS once again sidelined for practice on Thursday. So again, he started the week off with a limited back-to-back DMPs. It's going to make Randall Cobb and Allen Lazard that much more enticing for cash and tournament games alike. I think the Kansas City receivers, again, it's a tough guess, and I would lean towards Pringle and cash for sure. But between Pringle, Hardman, Robinson, man, a lot of weeks one of those guys is going off, and the fact that we can get all of them for 4,200 or cheaper, I just think they're worthwhile darts to be sprinkling throughout the lineup. And then also, man, Julio Jones at just 4,700. You were saying, has Tyreek Hill ever been cheaper? Has Julio Jones ever been cheaper than 4,700? That is absolutely bonkers for the man. I understand he has not been the Julio Jones, of old. But with that said, he's still the number 2 receiver in a game that we're expecting going to happen. Like, if it's not going to be a shootout, it's going to go really poorly for the Titans. Let's put it that way. And I think it's been a little bit overstated how bad Julio's been. Small sample this year, but the guy is still a top 30 receiver. No, he's not the top freaking 5 world beater that we were used to for the past decade. We're still talking about someone that 26 among 96 wide receivers in yards per reception. His PFF receiving grade tied with Amari Cooper, ahead of guys like Adam Thielen and Mike Evans. Yards per route run, 1.76, the exact same as DeAndre Hopkins. So I understand Julio was not the same guy this year as he was in the past. That doesn't mean he's not capable of scoring a touchdown like he did last week, like he should have done against the Seahawks all the way back in week 2. If the refs had freaking eyes, I'm still upset about that. And hey, man, this could be a situation where Burrow and company get up and actually force Tannehill and company to throw the ball, which, as we've talked about, when they have all these weapons, Tanny is a little bit better than I think we saw for most of the second half of the year. So if you want to go with a Tanny, Julio, AJB stack, it's burned us 18 straight weeks, Andrew, but maybe, just maybe, they've been waiting for the playoffs to give us that big time boom. So I do like Julio at that 4,700 spot. Where are you thinking about paying up here? Because again, to me, it's kind of like the running back 5K range, where I'm not against any of these guys priced above 5K. I just kind of want to wait for the projected ownership to settle a little bit. And then once we find out who's the, cheaper and less chalky guys, that's when we pounce.
Yeah, man, that breakdown of Julio is just so spot on, because he literally just fits the mold of a perfect tournament wide receiver, because you look at his teammate, everyone's going to play A.J. Brown, so you just play the other guy.
It's Julio week, Andrew. Let's go.
There have been much worse dusty wide receivers you could have played that were under-owned than Julio Jones. I think that is a good point. He's coming off a bye week, should be healthy, should be fully rested. So, yeah, I'll probably have to head up playing some Julio Jones. And the good thing is, too, is you're going to know, that it's the Titans playing the first game. So if you play Julio and he just does nothing, okay, well, then you can adjust your lineup based on that. But if he goes off, you can just chalkify the rest of your team and you're good to go.
I thought you were going to say if he does nothing, you can just, you can relax. The lineups are dead. You're done.
You can just kind of take the rest of the weekend off. So I think that is a good call there for Julio Jones. So we talked about Tee Higgins being the most popular Bengals wide receiver. But I mean, the way that just watching that game, with Jamar Chase, I mean, they were just force feeding him. Like I had the under on Jamar Chase at like 5 receptions, and he has like 3 on the first drive. I'm like, oh my god, like this is gonna be terrible for me. It's like every time they the camera panned him, it was like some cornerback that I've never heard of, like Desmond Trufant is like, he's like 7 yards back, just trying to not get absolutely cooked by Jamar Chase. I'm like, dude, like no one can stop him right now. So Jamar Chase, 35% target share, went over 110 receiving yards for the 3rd straight game, not including week 18 when the Bengals rested their starters. I mean, the Titans, 2nd most receiving yards allowed per game to wide receivers. His prop receiving line was at 69.5, earlier in the week, which was just laughable. 30% target share over the past 3 starts. And if you look at the Titans defense, they're a pass funnel defense. 2nd fewest rushing yards allowed per game. I think the Bengals are going to have to attack through the air. And that's what the Bengals have done when they face defenses like the Titans, where they know they have a strong run defense. So the Bengals are like, all right, fine, we'll just throw. Like the Zach Taylor and company have done a really good job this year of identifying the weakness of the defensive opponent and really exploiting it, whether it be through Joe Mixon against bad run defenses, or whether it be through the passing game against bad pass defenses like the Tennessee Titans. So I think that Jamar Chase, again, if he's just going to be under rostered, I mean, yeah, I'm just going to play Jamar Chase. Hot take.
Jamar Chase, good at football. That's the sort of stuff you can learn here on the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Close things out here with a look at some of the tight ends. Andrew, I'm surprised you didn't come to me with Cam Brate as our cost-saving tight end. 2,700, 3+ targets in 12 of his last 13 games. A little more 2 tight end stuff from the Bucks. Just not enough upside.
Not for me, no. Yeah. It's going to be no for me, dog.
It would be nice if he had, I don't know, 1 game with more than 35 yards this year. So probably not, but if I can't sell Andrew on a tight end under 3K, like that's when I know it's like, all right, Ian, time to get off. It's another week, and we said it, last week as well, but this is a week where if you can go 2 tight ends as well, I think it's just an easy way to differentiate the lineup in tournaments. I would say George Kittle is someone to consider. I mean, I thought he could go off last week as well. And when he didn't, my first thought was like, okay, they must be using him to block more often. That we saw that kind of rear its head in 2019 where Jimmy G didn't have that many dropbacks to begin with. And then even when he did, you had to wonder if Kittle was going to be staying in there to help pass protect because let's face it, the guy's an incredible blocker. They're going to use him accordingly. But just 5,300 for, in my opinion, the best tight end in the game. It's just always a problem with actually getting him the amount of targets he, a person of his talent, you would say deserves. But with Kittle, man, he was running around on 24 of Jimmy G's 25 dropbacks last week. So we know this dude has slate breaking potential. Just 5,300, that is awfully cheap. So if I am going to really have a pay up tight end in tournaments that I'm really going to focus on, I would say it's Kittle. But once again, man, Kelsey, Gronk, Kittle, Knox, Hisby, Uzama, you can literally take any of those guys, put both of them in your lineup. And I think that's an easy way in tournaments to construct that roster. Because I think on some of these shows and your more hardcore players, I think they are more willing to do the 2 tight end builds. But in general, I just think it's something that people are really afraid of and don't even really consider it throughout the week. I mean, look, season long players like putting another tight end in your flex. Like I just don't even know if that's something that crosses the mind of more guys than not. So 2 tight ends again. If you are going to pay up a little bit, I like Kittle at that reduced price versus Gronk and Kelsey. Andrew, what say you? I know you're also a fan of Kittle. And hey, maybe Tom Brady's number 1 receiver that isn't getting shadowed by Jalen Ramsey. Maybe he could have a good game.
Yeah, I mean, Gronk had a, kind of an outlier performance last week. He only had he caught 5-6 targets for 31 yards and he caught a touchdown. But basically since week 11, there's only been 2 games where Gronk has not had at least 8 targets. So I expect, last time he had a down game, it was the first game that Chris Godwin got hurt, I believe in. And, he just had this weird game where he had 7 targets and caught like 1 pass. He bounced back the next week, and I expect Gronk to bounce back this week. You look at the Rams defense, 12th in targets allowed to tight ends. Again, like I mentioned before, the Rams just give up a lot of completions. Like that's what their defense does. Like they're not trying to, stop you from completing a pass. They just want you to dink and dunk the ball down the field, which Brady is more than happy to do. So it's like, yeah, like give me the PPR points with Brady. And completing all of these passes, whether it's to his receivers or to Rob Gronkowski or to the running backs. I think all of these guys are going to be up, in the 5, 6, 7 catch range when it's all said and done. So I think Rob Gronkowski makes sense. George Kittle, I mean, dude, like 8% target share last week. Like, what the hell, man? Like, after he saw 21% in week 18, we're like, all right, he's got the peripherals. Like, this should be good. I know the yards weren't there, but, it should be coming. And then just like, absolutely nothing. I mean, I had a couple good lineups last week too with Kittle on the flex. I'm like, all right, here we go. And just like, it just never transpired. I'm like, where is he? I know I'm watching the Nickelodeon broadcast. Is this the wrong broadcast? Is George Kittle not doing anything on this particular broadcast? Do I need to switch over to CBS? What is going on? But you look at the 49ers, their defense allowed the 6th highest passer rating on targets to tight ends this season. He caught 7 of 9 passes for 92 yards the last time he faced the Packers. I mean, like his price is the same as Brandon Ayuk. Like basically he's $100 more. And it's like, who would you rather play, George Kittle or Brandon Ayuk? And I think you'd probably rather play George Kittle, even though Ayuk has been seeing a decent amount of targets in this offense. I think eventually the targets have to regress positively for George Kittle. Like we've seen him too often lead this team as the number 1 receiver in the passing game. So like Debo's role kind of like in and out. It's like seemingly impossible to try to project like what he's going to do on a weekly basis because he's either rushing or, catching passes out of the backfield, just doing a vast assortment of things. Tyler Higbee, I mentioned earlier as a cash game, 20% target share over the last 4 games. Like that's the highest of any of the remaining tight ends. And, he's someone, again, you can look at him as like a wide receiver. He's 4K and he has a 20% target share. Like that's really good for someone of his player. And I think the other thing too, that's important to just talk about with tight ends is however you can, if you are game stacking a game, you're obviously stacking your quarterback. Like you want to include the tight end into that stack because a lot of times the tight end, it's just, did you not score a touchdown or did you? Like that's what you're really looking for the tight end. And when you're looking for winning stacks, they usually are correlated to tight end production. So, or with touchdowns. So anytime, if that's how you kind of figure out how you can play a tight end, that's what I would do. Try to incorporate it into your stack as kind of a way to figure out which tight end you should play.
Favorite GPP defense, Andrew, on our handy dandy notes here. You have the Buffalo Bills. Last time they faced the Kansas City Chiefs, they racked up 15 DraftKings points. Yes, Patrick Mahomes, didn't have the worst day ever on the stat sheet, but as we've seen sometimes, things go a little bit south for the Chiefs offense. He will press, take a sack here, throw a pick there. It does seem like the Buffalo Bills, who, again, like you'll be hard pressed to find any past defense metrics that don't paint them as the number 1 defense in the league, seeing them as the 2nd cheapest on the slate. I know Mahomes and company are scary, but we've seen numerous instances this year of them being held in check, including by this very defense.
Yeah, I think that Buffalo, they're cheap enough, and because they play the last game, you're going to probably already know what your fate is at this point. So it doesn't even really necessarily matter what the Bills defense ends up doing because it's like, oh, if the Bills defense gets me 30 points, like, okay, then I'll, min cash with my lineup. And if not, then you know how your day's going to be settled. So yeah, I think that they just make the most sense. And chances are hopefully you're, up in a big GPP tournament and you just have the Bills defense. You're like, all right, Bills defense, just don't get me negative points and we'll be good to go.
First or last, everyone. That's the strategy here, as the great Ricky Bobby once said. All right, enough of that, Andrew. The main event. Time to hit some props. You have not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, but 6 of them for the people. Let's hear it.
Yeah, so I mentioned this one. I foreshadowed it a little bit earlier when we were talking about Josh Allen. So he's averaging 65 rushing yards per game over his last 7. His current line is at 48.5 rushing yards. So I'm going to take the over on Josh Allen rushing yards. Elijah Mitchell, 71.5 rushing yards. I'm going to go over on that. You look at the Green Bay Packers run defense.
23rd in yards before contact per carry and 30th in explosive run play rate allowed.
Perfect. This is exactly. Ian stole the words right out of my mouth. And the way that you look at it, carry totals, Elijah Mitchell, 27, 21, 21, 22, 27, 27 in his past 6 starts. He's cleared 71.5 rushing yards in 5 of those contests. So look, there's always the concern that, if they fall behind, like, will they run the ball? It's like, I mean, if there's any team that's going to run the ball like down 21-0, it's the 49ers. They're going to try to establish the run like as best they can, as humanly as possible, especially now that you have Jimmy Garoppolo, who's got this thumb injury. He's got some shoulder sprain. They're playing in like 0-degree weather. It's going to be cold out there. I can't really imagine that they're going to want him dropping back 40 times a throw. So I think they're going to try to establish the run, and that's going to be with Elijah Mitchell. So I think 71.5 rushing yards is an easy over for him. Aaron Jones, so this one I'm going under on. So he's at 48.5 rushing yards. And really it's because he's been splitting carries with A.J. Dillon since week 12. And it's actually been A.J. Dillon's been getting the majority of carries in the Green Bay Packers backfield. So he's at 65-48 in favor of A.J. Dillon since week 12. It's about 13 to 9.6 average per game. And really you're playing Aaron Jones in DFS because of the receiving. Like that's where you want to get the bread and butter from Aaron Jones. But the 49ers run defense has been really, really good. Basically, since week 10, no running back has rushed for over 47 yards against them. Dallas rushed for just 45 yards and 16 rushing attempts last week between Zeke and Tony Pollard. Yes, Aaron Jones is way more efficient than Ezekiel Elliott is, but how many carries will he get? Like, that's kind of the bet I'm trying to make here. A.J. Dillon, I think, will probably lead the team in carries. So Aaron Jones will have to average his, 9 yards per carry, which he can't always do, but I'm going to bet on A.J. Dillon seeing more work as a rusher. Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow. Chase is at 72.5. Joe Burrow is at 265.5 passing yards. Like this line has moved a lot. I think it opened at 69.5 down Prize Picks. And then over on Underdog it is at like 90. So like that's something you always want to take advantage of. If you're looking at multiple spots, like, all right, so I'm going to take the over where it's really, really low and take the under on where it's really, really high. Like, and then that way you can double dip. You could potentially win both bets based on how the player ends up performing. If he gets you into that nice middle range, but I just thought it was too low for Chase at 72.5. I talked about him, why I like him a lot in this matchup against the Titans, who have allowed the second most wide receiving yards to wide receivers this season. Again, the Raiders were a team that was supposed to stop explosive wide receivers. They did not do that. The Titans have not been a team that's stopped anything through the air this season. So I think that Jamar Chase over 72.5, I think that's a good line. You want to get it anywhere you can get it, probably under like 80. I think is appropriate because like I said, like I've seen books where it was at 90, it's been that high because he just is that type of player that can just put up these massive game totals. And like I said, 110 receiving yards in his last 3 starts. Ryan Tannehill under 235.5 passing yards. Again, if Derrick Henry comes back, I'm concerned about how much they'll throw. Tannehill has not hit this mark very often this season. I know he's got AJ Brown and Julio Jones back in the lineup, but it's still a team that wants to run the football, whether Derrick Henry's back or not. I think that's kind of the way that they want to do. So Tannehill under 235.5 passing yards. And then tight end special of the week, Jeff Swaim under 2 receptions. So this guy ran a route on 23% of the dropbacks in week 18 in a post Michael Pruitt Titans offense. So basically we have like a 2 tight end committee between Jeff Swaim and Anthony Ferkser, and the Lions basically have no idea what they're doing with these 2 guys because you have Ferkser with the higher receiving yards prop, but you have Jeff Swaim with the higher reception yards prop. So they're looking at, Anthony Ferkser as this dynamic George Kittle-esque player where Jeff Swaim is falling into the Zach Ertz where I can't break a tackle, but he's going to just rack up reception after reception. So, under 2 reception. I mean, like, if he's literally only running around on like 25, a quarter of Ryan Tannehill's dropbacks, he then has to catch 3 passes on those said dropbacks. So a lot needs to work in Jeff Swaim's favor. Jeff Swaim, the modern day Zach Ertz, for him to go over this bet. So I'm going to go under 2 receptions on Jeff Swaim.
Jeff Swaim. If it was a 1.5, man, that'd be one thing, but 2?
Well, that's what Ferkser's is at. So it's like, okay, like, sure, I'll just go under on Jeff Swaim then.
Yeah, I'll bet against a 30-year-old block first tight end. Call me old fashioned, Andrew. Like those, Josh Allen over 48.5 rushing yards, Elijah Mitchell over 71.5 rushing yards, Aaron Jones under 48.5 rushing yards against the 49ers league best defense in yards before contact, allowed per carry. Jamar Chase over 72.5 receiving yards, Joe Burrow over 265.5 passing yards, Ryan Tannehill under 235.5 passing yards, and Jeff Swaim under 2 receptions. That last one's going to be our, stamp of approval, PFF guarantee. That's our guarantee.
He's going to catch the first pass of the game. I'm just going to be like, this can't be happening right now.
If Jeff Swaim doesn't get more if he does get more than 2 receptions this week, I'm not going to make any crazy promises, but I will not be happy, people. And I will be betting on that one for sure, along with the rest of the group. Andrew, great stuff as always. People can find your work on PFF.com, on Twitter at Andrew Erickson _. This week you got your props up, you have your DFS cheat sheet out, and you savage you got your 2022 fantasy football rankings out. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver. I'm guessing tight end is on the way as well. Anything else you want to get off your chest, my friend?
Oh yeah, just make sure you go check out the prop article. I usually try to update it on Friday with some of the newer props that come up on Prize Picks or Underdog. So as news changes, we can get some more action in on those, because a lot of the bets, honestly, if you look at that article now, it's like they've been bet up or bet down. Like Josh Allen's total yardage prop was at 295.5 yards yesterday. On Wednesday, it's up to like 330 now because everyone was like, it was way too low. So that's the advantage to just getting into the article early on. Like that's where I'm have an edge. I think, just looking at the lines as they first come out, you see the inefficient lines, you jump on them, and then you kind of back off. You kind of let the market kind of dictate where they go from there. So I think that's one edge. And then, make sure you check out the 2020 rankings through all the positions. Basically, I go through my 2022 rankings and also reflect a retrospective, I would say, on the 2021 season and my hits and misses, basically, and kind of just work through process. Why wasn't I, hitting home Cooper Kupp more? Why was I not drafting more of Deebo Samuel? Why did I have Kenny Golladay ranked so high? Like, what was I possibly thinking? So kind of reviewing the mistakes I made along with some hits and trying to, look ahead towards 2022 and take away the lessons and then put them into the new season. So, I do not, as the tight end connoisseur that I am, I refuse to miss out on Dawson Knox breakout again. So whoever the next Dawson Knox will be, I will not miss out on them, because when you look back at it, Ian, it's crazy to think his ADP was like tight end 30, and he was an athletic tight end who had a decent amount. He ended the 2020 season, pretty good in terms of routes run, and he played an offense with Josh Allen. And for some reason, it just didn't like click with me that, wow, this guy like probably could be like a legitimate tight end. And I don't know how I missed it, but
there were a few things. Yeah, just to be fair, I'm old enough to remember the August beat writer report saying that Jacob Hollister was going to like win the starting job over Dawson Knox. Oh God,
the beat reporters just absolutely destroying us.
That's why. Yeah. So I mean, even like Dalton Schultz, man, I love David Hellman. I think he's one of the best beat writers in the game for the Cowboys. And Blake Jarwin got hurt, which changed some things. But I remember, even having a Cowboys beat writer tell me in the freaking summer, like, you're sleeping on Blake Jarwin, and it was the opposite, man. So even the guys most plugged in on the team can't always tell us exactly where things are going to be in the next few months. Do you have a lean right now, and why is it Cole Kmet?
Yeah, no, he's up there. It's Cole Kmet as the guy. We just need the Bears to get. We a lot of my takeaways were honestly just draft guys on good offenses. Like that's just like when in doubt, just like, is the offense good? Okay, draft this guy. Like, and the fact that maybe we don't weigh that enough when we look at projected volume, and maybe we're looking at the volume, but that's really more for running backs. Receivers and tight ends, yes, obviously you need volume to produce, but the efficiency really does help a lot, especially when you catch a bunch of touchdowns. Like, you'll find it's much easier to produce when you're catching 5 or 6 touchdowns a year, and maybe you don't have a 26% target share. DJ Moore would love to catch more touchdowns, man. Like, he's got a great target share, but unfortunately, it's just still not getting it done.
Maybe in 2022. Free DJ Moore, for the love of God, Carolina. For Andrew, I'm Ian. Thanks so much for tuning in to this edition of the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. And until next time, take care, everybody.